Thank you, Max. We are ready now. We actually asked Jonathan to offer his D'var Torah before reading Torah so that we could hear his framing. And when we hear him chant Torah, we will have his teaching in our minds as we hear the verses chanted. So Jonathan, over to you for your teaching. Thank you again for teaching us this morning.
Thank you. I really appreciate the clergy team offering me this opportunity and for their input, and I thank all of you for your patience. This week, we read Vayechi, the last parsha of the book of Genesis. Seems like a good time to ask, what is this book of Genesis? Well, it's a lot of things. It's a story of creation, a narrative full of characters, divine and human, and a psychological, emotional tale with love, hospitality, yearning, loyalty, but also personal failings, jealousy, rivalry, and subterfuge. It's a story of individuals becoming a collective. It's a spiritual text, and a dreamscape, as Rabbi Toner talked about 2 weeks ago. And it's also an impetus and a foundation for much of our ritual. It's a lot. To understand Genesis, we might do, as Rabbi Jonathan Sachs suggests. He wrote, if you want to understand what a book is about, look carefully at how it ends. So what happens here in Vayechi? In this parsha, Jacob is old and prepares for his death. After he dies, there's anxiety, but then the resolution of the relationship between Joseph and his brothers. Joseph offers blessings to each of his children, the future tribes of Israel, and then Joseph dies too. Within all of this, there's a moment that stands out. The trope actually signals, and you'll hear later, around the word ve'ata, meaning now. As he's preparing to die, Jacob claims Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. He doesn't just offer them praise. He says, "Lehem, they shall be mine." Jacob takes them as if they were his sons. He promises them a portion of his inheritance equal to that of his other sons, the boys' uncles. He says that we will bless our children to be like them. It's striking, considering all the previous rivalries and intrigues related to blessings, how disruptive it is that the grandfather claims that the grandchildren are his own. How upsetting that the grandfather says all of this in front of all of his children, that these grandchildren in particular will have his blessing and an equal status in their inheritance, as do his own children. How crazy that they are to be recognized for all time, not only in their possession of the land, but also that future generations will bless their children in the name of Ephraim and Manasseh. So who are Ephraim and Manasseh? Ephraim and Manasseh are born to Joseph before Jacob and Joseph's brothers arrive in Egypt, a land in which Joseph has experienced his own darkness, fear, narrowness, and affliction. Joseph names his firstborn Manasseh, saying, "God has made me forget entirely my troubles and my father's house." He names Ephraim to mean, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. But why do we bless our children after Ephraim and Manasseh? There are a couple of classic answers based on today's parsha. First, it said that Ephraim and Manasseh did not fight. In fact, they're the only siblings in Genesis who don't fight. Perhaps that's because we don't know much else about them. Second, it said we bless our children in their names because they are the continuation of the line, and their blessing is a symbol of love. Rabbi Sachs makes the point that they are the first grandchildren to be blessed by a grandparent. He credits his predecessor, Lord Jacobovitz, who taught that all the other blessings are from fathers to sons, and between fathers and sons there can be tension. Jacob's blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh is the only insistence in the Torah of the grandparent blessing the grandchild. And between grandparents and grandchildren, there can be no tension, only pure love. Third, while other children and characters' blessings involve prophecy, Ephraim and Manasseh fulfill a prophecy. Before Jacob leaves Canaan and goes down to Egypt, God reveals the future to Jacob, including not only the enslavement of his descendants, but also that he will be redeemed and returned to Canaan. God also reveals the names of Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So when Joseph sees them, he knows God's prophecy is being fulfilled. Fourth, Ephraim and Manasseh are born not in Canaan, but in Egypt. They grow up in relative isolation in the diaspora without the rest of their family. Yet the rabbis assert they knew their Jewish customs. Rabbi Yehuda Leib Ginsburg makes this point. Jacob saw that the diaspora was growing closer to his children, and he knew that in a foreign place, Jews are put in the danger of assimilation and acculturation. Therefore, he blessed them that they should be like Ephraim and Manasseh, the first Jews who were born, grew up, and were educated in the diaspora in Egypt, but despite this remained faithful to Judaism. This last point resonates with me and has additional meaning, especially if, as Rabbi Sachs suggests, we derive understanding of the whole book of Genesis by looking at this at the end. We learn in Genesis that the world is created, and Ephraim and Manasseh help us to understand why. God's creation in Genesis involves a plan. Humans are agents in fulfilling the plan. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob all had a personal relationship with God and learned they had a role to play. The brothers were sold down to Egypt. That too was part of the plan. And Ephraim and Manasseh at the end of Genesis, being part of the prophecy, they helped to fulfill God's plan. Also in Genesis, God creates Adam and then Eve, and they have children who are characters in the narrative. But Ephraim and Manasseh we see as more than individuals. Ephraim and Manasseh help to connect the grandfather with his children. They help to resolve fissures between their father and his brothers. Ephraim and Manasseh at the end of Genesis create a family. Even more so in Genesis, God invites us into a covenant. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg writes that perhaps the most important revelation in the book of Genesis is that the infinite cosmic ground of being loves the trivial, finite creatures on this puny planet. Therefore, God recruits humans to join a committed love relationship, a covenant, for the purpose of together repairing creation's flaws and perfecting human societies. The ultimate goal is to create a world in which life flourishes and all people will be treated as being of infinite value. This covenant paradigm, he continues, starts with a commitment to keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice in Genesis 18. And as is signaled here, it ends with Joseph ascendant in Egypt, having used his power to save lives and transform the world. Ephraim and Manasseh at the end of Genesis carry forward God's covenant. On Friday night, when we usher in Shabbat as a family, and whatever that means these days, before Kiddush, we read an excerpt from the first parsha of Genesis. Yom HaShishi, and the heavens and the earth and all their hosts were completed, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, for on it he rested from all his work. This reminds us of creation, God's plan, and that God's plan has a purpose. We also have the blessing of our children, that they should be like Ephraim and Manasseh. This reminds us that we are part of this covenant and have a role in fulfilling God's plan. In subsequent weeks, we may continue to feel our own isolation and fear. As we welcome Shabbat and begin our Shabbat rest, whether we bless our children or not, perhaps we can pause to think about God's plan, our covenant, and what role we play in fulfilling God's plan. Thank you again to the clergy and to all of you for your indulgence. Shabbat Shalom.